The Central Minnesota Freethinkers, we're a group of freethinkers, agnostics, humanists, rationalists, atheists, and others who prefer to live our lives based on reason and rational thought rather than on religious superstition and dogma. We meet at 10 o'clock on the first Sunday of each month at the, Good Earth Co-op to share a couple hours of coffee and friendly conversation with like-minded folks. We picked Sunday morning because, as it turns out, we're all free. So I'd like to have you come and join us. And now it's my distinct honor and privilege this evening to present tonight's guest speaker, the self-avowed godless liberal and noted atheist, Dr. P.Z. Myers. P.Z. is a professor of evolutionary biology at the University of Minnesota at Morris, the author of the award-winning science blog Pharyngula, and he's graciously agreed to speak to us tonight on the evolution of creationism. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello. Can you all hear me? Am I loud enough?
We can hear you in the back.
You can hear me? Okay, good, because I noticed I don't have a microphone, so we'll make do. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. You notice my address, Morris? It's just down the road. I don't know why I don't come here more often, or why you guys don't visit me. You know, it's just an hour and a half away. Feel free to stop by. Well, what I want to talk about today is, like it says, the evolution of creationism. And it's actually a very sad story. Because what I want to tell you is that creationism once started out as a reasonably respectable position. And it has since gone through decay, degradation, corruption. It's gotten worse and worse over the many years. Actually, not that many years, over the last century. And the version of creationism that you all are probably familiar with is crazy town. It's nothing like it was even 100 years ago. It's just gotten worse and worse. Well, we can take this all the way back to the 17th century. We're kind of clipped off there, but oh, that's all right. This is James Ussher's chronology. Has anybody heard of this? This is, yeah, some of you have. This is the primate of all Ireland, who did his analysis of the genealogy of the Bible in the 17th century and determined that the world was created precisely in October 4004 BC. Now, I know that sounds silly, right? It should sound silly. How did he do this? Well, you know, there's a number of things, which is he's adding up the kings of the Bible, and their reigns, and subtracting those. Also, there is a hefty bit of numerology in there. Some of you may know that Jesus was actually born in 4 BC, not 0 AD. And 4004 BC, 4 BC, you notice the symbology there? He was dividing the universe into 1,000-year segments. And so there were 7,000-year segments before the world was supposed to end and paradise was supposed to come to earth in 1996. You may have noticed he missed. It didn't happen. Well, anyway, the thing is, though, that in his day, this was a reasonable approach. This is actually a scientific approach. That you take the data you have and you analyze it as well as you can, and you come up with an approximate idea. You estimate the age of the Earth. So this is just simply an early estimation of the Earth using a text source which turns out to be not so good, but he's making a proper effort. What we do in science, though, is as science progresses, we supersede old estimates with better estimates based on better data. And that hasn't happened here. Now, this particular listing, this excerpt from Ussher's chronology, I actually got a couple years ago. It was sent to me in email. It was sent to me as an advertisement from Wingnut Daily, better known as WorldNet Daily. It's an online magazine for the conservative movement, and what they were doing is selling copies of Ussher's original book. And if you notice the ad copy here, considered not only a literary classic, but also an accurate reference. The Annals of the World was so highly regarded for its preciseness that the timeline from it was included in the margins of many King James Version Bibles, calling to mind the fact that the earth is only around 6,000 years old. Notice, accurate, precise, earth is only 6,000 years old. There's something wrong here. That's not quite right. Another guy who was very influential in the early days of creationism was somebody you may have also heard of, this fellow, William Paley. William Paley was actually a good writer, a smart guy. He wrote a book called Natural Theology that Charles Darwin praised highly. It was published in 1803, I believe it was. It's a book that makes an argument that if you see something really complicated, it must have been created, because the only way William Paley can imagine complex things coming to be is by the agent of an intelligent hand. This is the foundation of the modern intelligent design movement, is William Paley's ideas. And he made this famous analogy that of the watch found on the heath. If you find a watch on the heath, you look at this and say, hey, that's really complicated. How did it get to be there? And you wouldn't say, oh, it just suddenly hatched out there. You would say it was built by somebody, because you know something about the construction of the watches. And he put together this phrase that it's got several parts that are framed and put together for a purpose. And if any of you are familiar with the intelligent design movement, you've probably heard this phrase many, many times. So this is intelligent design laid out clearly in a literate fashion, in a way that Charles Darwin could appreciate as a strong argument, even though he shot it down in The Origin of Species. In 1803, and I got to tell you this, intelligent design has not changed one bit. Not in the last 200 and almost 10 years. It's been the same story over and over again. And that's a sign of a bad science, when it doesn't progress at all. I'd also have to mention that William Paley was totally refuted. His entire argument was blown apart. I want to give you an excerpt from this. This is a really good phrasing for the argument. A design must be proved before a designer can be inferred. The matter in controversy is the existence of design in the universe, and it is not permitted to assume the contested premises and thence infer the matter in dispute. Insidiously to employ the words contrivance, design, and adaptation before these circumstances are made apparent in the universe, thence justly inferring a contriver, is a popular sophism which proposes us to be watchful. What he's saying here is that you can't simply say it looks complicated, therefore it must have been designed. He's saying that's assuming your premises. You have to go out and show that this object was actually literally designed. And you might be wondering who wrote this, and it was some poet, Percy Shelley, in 1814, penned this wonderful refutation. It's called The Refutation of Deism. It's a really excellent essay. I'm just giving you that one paragraph, but I recommend it highly. It's one of my favorite essays ever. You can find it in Hitchens' Portable Atheist if you're looking for a contemporary source. Otherwise, just get on the web. You can find this just about anywhere. But it's a really good, strong argument. So here we've got intelligent design shot down in 1814. We haven't yet moved on beyond it. Now, the whole basis of this argument is William Paley's argument that if you have exquisite contrivances, oh, and let me just remind you, you can't just simply employ the words contrivance, design, and adaptation, and thereby claim there was a designer, but that's what Paley was saying. The exquisite contrivances of organic life could not have arisen without the guidance of an intelligent creator, he says. Charles Darwin, on the other hand, opposed that by saying, that's not true. That if you go out as a naturalist, if you go out and look at the world around you, what you can find is numerous gradations giving rise to complex and perfect organs by natural mechanisms with no need for guidance. And both of these gentlemen used as their examples the evolution of the eye. Paley looked at the eye and said, hey, I can't imagine how that could have evolved. While Darwin looked at it and said, hey, look, here's how it happened. I can give you a complete description. I can show you all these different organisms that have different forms of the eye that show a complete gradation of forms. So one of these is the scientific approach. I think you can guess which one. And the other is not. Now, as I said, creationism was essentially refuted with Charles Darwin. It was refuted by Percy Shelley. It was shot down early in the 19th century. And what you find in religious movements throughout the 19th century is nothing like what you see now. What many religious movements were trying to do at that time was struggling to reconcile the facts presented to them with their belief in a deity. So what was going on was something very peculiar, because they weren't questioning the science. The science is pretty much hard to question because it's data, it's facts, it's observations plunked down in front of you, and you can't really reject them without denying the evidence of your eyes. But at the same time, they had a deep faith, right? They believed in God. They thought God created the world. And the most common thing people were thinking then is, well, okay, I still believe God created the world, but science is telling us how God created the world. Which, if you think about it, is a pretty reasonable approach to take. If you've got one belief, you've got a set of observations, you try and bring them together. You try and reconcile them, and you come to a compromise. Now, I'm an atheist, so my compromise is much easier to make, but still, these people were making a sincere and honest effort, which you have to appreciate. You can't simply say they were stupid. They weren't. They were clever people trying to make a strong argument. Now, I want to bring this up into the 20th century and tell you what was going on here. This is my little quick history of creationism in the 20th century. So we've got some timelines here with some famous people, or not so famous people, and a couple of key events up there at the top. Some of the events I want to mention up there are in the early years of the 20th century. Let's see, I think it was 1910 and 1911, we had two important books written. The Schofield Reference Bible. Who's heard of it? Anyone? Okay. Some of you who come from a fundamentalist background may have actually used the Schofield Reference Bible. It's still contemporary. You can still buy this. What the Schofield Reference Bible is an edition of King James Version of the Bible with annotations. Instead of just having the Bible there with the words from the Bible laid out for you, it contains footnotes and annotations. They tell you what this means. It tries to explain what the Bible is saying as you read along. And this was a very, very influential book. It's the book that is actually at the heart of the evangelical movement today, although most evangelicals have ignored it. They've moved beyond it. But the Schofield Reference Bible is very important. Another key event is that the publication of that other book, The Fundamentals. What this is a collection of essays and short books written by theological scholars, Protestant scholars, to try and lay out the foundations of Christianity from a Protestant perspective, of course. And what the fundamentals led to is the formation of the fundamentalist movement. These are recent events. Fundamentalism and evangelical Christianity come from the early years of the 20th century. I know, when you talk to them nowadays, they act like, well, this is what Jesus thought. No, it's not what Jesus thought. It's what a bunch of early 20th century Americans thought. Okay, these reference books were very influential. These were the ideas that were shaping people in these early years. Then up there you see another little blue star there. Another big event happened in the 1920s. That was the Scopes trial. In many ways, the Scopes trial was a disaster for both sides involved. I know, we like to think, oh, that was where we made fun of the creationists and sent them scampering off, right? Even though they actually literally won the trial. The net outcome of the Scopes trial was the humiliation and laughter directed at those hokey old fundamentalists who believed in such backward things as creationism and a 6,000-year-old earth and all this sort of thing. And it's had unfortunate repercussions. One thing is that at the Scopes trial, they were actually not battling over the age of the Earth. Those of you who've seen Inherit the Wind, you may remember there's this spectacular moment in the play, a very memorable moment, where William Jennings Bryan is cornered, and the lawyer is asking him, how old do you think the Earth is? And he refuses to say. He sort of says, well, maybe a day in the Bible is many millions of years. I'm not worried about this. And he's ridiculed for it. You know, when I watch that now, when I look at that and read that now, it's a very peculiar thing, because William Jennings Bryan was actually saying something pretty reasonable. He was saying, I don't know, the Bible isn't specific about the age of the Earth. He's basically saying, I will defer to the scientists. I believe God created the world, but I don't know how he did it. I'll let the geologists tell me how old it is. And he was ridiculed for this. He was pilloried over this. You know, he actually died a few days after this trial. The stress of the trial probably killed him. So this is a very peculiar thing. We have this myth that the creationists were, that, you know, the fools and idiots and morons of the early 20th century. They weren't. They were liberal progressives who were trying to reconcile science and faith. And there were, of course, many of people I would find much more sympathy with now who are adamant scientists who see no need for the Bible. And they were in conflict. What happened after this was something sort of disastrous to us that led to the seeds of this modern movement. And that is, the creationists scurried away, went into their little dark holes in the ground in their shacks in the Appalachians. I'm making fun. And licked their wounds. And they still believed, right? Nothing about the Scopes trial was going to persuade somebody that they don't believe. They still believed. So they go off, and they continue to meet. They try to affirm their belief in the Bible. They try still to reconcile their beliefs with science. They're struggling with this, and then something happens, comes along, and that's a couple of people up there. Seventh-day Adventism. So Seventh-day Adventism was a prophetic religion that arose in the 19th century. The prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist movement was Ellen White. Ellen White believed that she actually had prophecies, that she actually spoke and visited with the Lord, that angels took her on visitations in the spirit world, and she would write these down, and the followers of Seventh-day Adventism would accept these as true prophecies, modern prophecies. Now, this was the way the Seventh-day Adventists thought, but you can imagine what most Christians at that time thought, is these are crazy heretics. We don't believe in prophets anymore. There's no modern prophets. So a lot of the religious people were very much opposed to Seventh-day Adventists. They were kind of off on the fringe. They were also people who were constantly prophesying the end of the world and trooping to mountaintops and on certain days and seeing the day pass and, oh, it didn't end after all, but still believing. So Ellen White had a vision once upon a time. She actually had a vision that an angel picked her up and took her back in time to visit with God and Jesus and witness the creation of the earth. So she was literally taken back, and she was literally viewing the literal creation of the earth, and it was literally created in 7 days, 6 days, the seventh day he rested, 6,000 years ago. Exactly like Usher said. And this became an element of the faith of the Seventh-day Adventists. It was literally written into their documents. They accepted this and believed this. No other Christian sect accepted this. Okay, this was not part of mainstream Christianity at all. In fact, this was considered heresy by most Christian sects. Just those creepy, weird Seventh-day Adventists. They keep coming around and knocking on your door and things like that. Nobody wants anything to do with those guys. Well, so they were kind of divorced from everything else. They were not part of the mainstream. However, there's this guy, George McCready Price. I've got to mention George McCready Price. George McCready Price is really responsible for the creationism you have now. George McCready Price was a Seventh-day Adventist. He was a fervent believer in the prophecies of Ellen White. He thoroughly accepted these. He had also had training as a geologist. And what he did is he tried to reinterpret all of geology not as a scientist would, but as a Seventh-day Adventist would. And he argued that geology actually showed that the Earth was 6,000 years old. He tried to shoehorn the evidence to fit into Ellen White's prophecy. So he's influential. He keeps talking to all the creationists, you know, the ones licking their wounds and talking about, oh, we've been clobbered, we're humiliated. George McCready Price kept talking to them and telling them, no, this is the truth. We still believe 6,000-year-old Earth, 6-day creation. That's how it all works. And he keeps hammering on them, but of course he's a Seventh-day Adventist. He's weird. We can't talk about Seventh-day Adventists. But George McCready Price had a real advantage here. Notice the length of that bar up there. That's his life. He didn't die until the 1960s. He just lived forever, it seemed like, constantly pounding his message into people. So this is an important lesson to us. If you want to succeed, just keep trucking away. That's the way to get there. And George McCready Price was really good at that. What happened, though, is he kept hammering on these people. He kept going to these creationist conferences and telling them, this is the way it is. You know, the Earth is 6,000 years old, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the time people say, no, that's crazy, except those two people there, John Whitcomb and Henry Morris. John Whitcomb and Henry Morris were mainstream fundamentalist evangelical Christians. They weren't weirdos like George McCready Price. And what they did is they listened to George McCready Price and they ripped off every single one of his ideas. Everything he said about geology, they stole. They literally stole, ripped it right off from him, and they published it in a very influential book called The Genesis Flood, published in 1961. I have a copy of it. If anybody wants to understand modern creationism, look for a copy of The Genesis Flood. It was the #1 most influential book in creationism of all time. This is the one that shaped it to the way it is now. So Whitcomb and Morris wrote this book, The Genesis Flood, which is Ellen White's prophecy plus George McCready Price's geology without mentioning Seventh-day Adventism. They mainstreamed crazy ideas from a prophet. It's really cunning and clever, okay? So basically they are an idea laundry. They cleaned off all that tainted Seventh-day Adventism, put it together into a story, and packaged it as a book called The Genesis Flood, which was then extremely influential. Both Ken Ham and Kent Hovind, who are big names in the creationist movement. I'm curious, has everybody heard of these guys? No. Oh, well. Ken Ham is the guy who created Answers in Genesis, who runs the Creation Museum down in Kentucky. I'll show you a little bit about Answers in Genesis in a moment. That's the #1 creationist organization in the world. It's making buckets of money. Well, it's starting to lose money now, which is good news. So he's very influential. Kent Hovind is the jailbird whose videos you can find on YouTube all over the place. And many creationists cite him all the time. He's a little bit off. He's very strange, but he's fanatical in his creationism. I was mentioning at dinner that he wrote a PhD thesis in order to get doctor in front of his name. It was through a ranch house in Colorado. It's not very impressive at all. I've actually read the thesis. It's kept on display at the National Center for Science Education in the bathroom. I guess for a little light reading and for emergency purposes. And the first sentence of his thesis is, "Hi, my name is Kent Hovind." And it goes downhill from there. Both of these guys have publicly praised the Genesis Flood. They have said this is the source of all their ideas. So that's how important that book is. Kent Hovind, by the way, is currently in jail for tax evasion. He'll be out in 2015. Something to look forward to. His son Eric is now touring the country doing the same old creationist crap. So anyway, that's creationism right there. Is modern creationism is largely the creation of Ken Ham and Kent Hovind under the influence of the Genesis Flood, indirectly from Seventh-day Adventism, although both of them would sneer at the idea that this came from a heretical cult like Seventh-day Adventism. I also briefly mentioned down here Philip Johnson. Philip Johnson is the guy who founded the intelligent design creationism movement. He's a Berkeley lawyer. Again, let me emphasize it. These guys are all literate, intelligent, smart people. They know what they're doing. They're really good at what they're doing. It's just that what they're doing is peddling horseshit to the country. But anyway, Philip Johnson founded intelligent design creationism, and that's another example of idea laundering, because what intelligent design creationism is, after several court decisions, like the Edwards versus Aguilar court case, which said that you cannot teach creationism in the schools, Philip Johnson laundered the ideas still further, and he took all those same creationist ideas and he removed God from them. They don't talk about God in the intelligent design creationism movement. They talk about the intelligent designer, which is essentially a synonym for God, but it doesn't use the evil word God, which would make the Supreme Court kick it out. So that's what's been going on all this time, is these guys have been stripping the provenance of ideas away from them so that they can peddle them to the public a little more effectively. Now, let me say a little bit about what people believed back there at the time of the fundamentals of the Scofield Reference Bible. Now, right now, you probably take it for granted that creationists believe the earth is 6,000 years old. They didn't. The turn of the last century, the most common idea, the idea that was pushed in the Scofield Reference Bible was this one. It's the gap theory. What the gap theory says is that when you read the Bible, there's the first verse which says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's Genesis 1:1. Then there's period, space, then Genesis 1:2, and the earth was without form and void, etc. Period, space. There's nothing in there. That's a blank space in the Bible. You can fill it with whatever you want. And they said, okay, the gap theory says that was billions of years in that gap. So Genesis 1:1 states that the earth was created, and it's perfectly fine to say it was created 4.5 billion years ago. And then there's this giant gap in the biblical record because nothing interesting is happening for God and man, right? Humans don't exist yet, so we're not going to worry about it. All this spectacular geology, all these changes are going on. Dinosaurs are romping about. The fundamentalists also believed that angels and Satan were fighting it out on earth during this billions of years. It would make for a spectacular movie if they ever rendered it down. They claim that a lot of geology was created not by sudden events, but by great wars between Satan and his demons and the angels on the surface of the earth. Anyway, that's going on for billions of years. I'm just picturing demons riding dinosaurs. Think what a movie that would make. Hollywood blockbuster. Anyway, so that's all billions of years. And then comes this next step, which is the various creation events that we care about. That the Bible is a book about the relationship between God and his people. It doesn't talk about all that science stuff. That's what the Scofield Reference Bible said, is set that aside, let the scientists take care of that. What we care about is God's covenant with mankind, that kind of thing. That theory, of course, is now ridiculed by the creationists. This is actually a picture I took, I think this was actually from Answers in Genesis, and they're intending to ridicule the whole idea. I mean, it is kind of silly. Say, okay, period space, that's a huge billion-year gap. Okay, but still, this is coming straight from a creationist source. Modern creationists really hate this theory. And I'll show you some more examples of that in a bit. The other way they explain this, and you may have heard this too, is the day-age theory. They said, God wrote the Bible. What's a day to God? God could consider 1 billion years to be a day. 1 million years, that's a day for God. He's without time and space and all this stuff. He can say whatever he wants. And they say then that what the book of Genesis is a metaphor for the creation events that occurred over the billions and millions of years that the scientists describe. Of course, this doesn't really work because when you look at the order of creation in Genesis, it's got some peculiarities. Like the sun, moon, and stars were created before fruit trees. And of course, if you expand this out, if you say a day is millions or billions of years, that's going to be kind of, or excuse me, I had that backwards. Fruit trees created first, then the sun, moon, and stars. And if you expand that to millions and billions of years, all the fruit trees will be dead by the time you get the sun rising, right? So these correlations don't work. And again, This is from a creationist site, shooting down this alternative hypothesis. So what do modern creationists think? Well, this is what they think. This again is from Answers in Genesis. Answers in Genesis is great for cartoons. They've got lots of really bad cartoons there. So what they're saying is that according to language and context, day is a regular day. It can only be a day. They're adamant about this. Whereas millions of years, arguing for millions of years, the day can't be a regular day, is going against the literal word of God. If you go to the Creation Museum, what you discover is that at the Creation Museum, they don't dedicate a single display to those awful atheists. I looked all over. There's nothing about Richard Dawkins. There's nothing about me even. Even though I was there, come on. But they really hate liberal Christians. There are a number of displays at the Creation Museum that are dedicated to slamming those darn liberal Christians who dare to compromise the holy word of God. And this is an example of this. Throughout the Creation Museum as well, they have many displays where they make it clear, millions of years is the magic phrase. Millions of years sends you to hell. Because the earth can't be millions of years old. Nothing can be millions of years old. The earth is only 6,000 years old. And so when you go through that museum, if you go through that museum, you will discover that there's these little places where they splatter on the words millions of years, and it's a sign of heresy. It's like the mark of Satan to say the words millions of years. So I said that very often while I was there. You know, it's just a really weird phenomenon that, you know, this is sort of a cute cartoon that will make your brain hurt. Try to keep in mind this is an allegory. You're actually off evolving from apes somewhere right now. Okay, which one's true? I don't know. But this is their problem, is that they're making these arguments. They're making an enemy of the majority of Christians in this country, and the majority of Christians in this country don't even know it. It's kind of amusing. What are the consequences of this? Well, this was a survey that was done recently, and it's kind of scary. What they were asking is they were asking people, what do you believe? Do you believe that human beings developed over millions of years and God had no part in this process, which happens to be the correct answer, by the way? Or do you believe that human beings have developed over millions of years, but God guided this process? No evidence for that. Or do you believe God created human beings pretty much in their present form within the last 10,000 years or so? And look at the bar graphs. The blue is the general public. About half the general public accepts that notion that the earth is only 6,000 years old. Think about this. You know, I actually test my students on this. I talk about creationism to my students. I give them a lecture on this stuff. And I explain to them that about half the country is creationist. And I give them a question like this in the test. And they almost all get it wrong because they refuse to believe this. But it keeps coming up in all the surveys. It's been consistent for the last 50 years that about 50% of the population believes that humankind is only about 6,000 years old. Okay, and 30% accept, okay, millions of years, but God guided this process. These are the liberal Christians that the creationists want to burn at the stake. And there's us, the atheists, 13%, which is getting there. That's not bad. We could do better. We're growing. But now the really scary part is look at the red bars. That's high school biology teachers. 16% of our high school biology teachers are believers in young earth creationism. That should worry you. And another half of the high school teachers believe in the God guiding it sort of idea. And this is reflected in the results that we see in our educational process. Our educational system sucks in this country. Really, it does. It's not doing a very good job. As a college-level biologist, I have to tell you, it's too late by the time it gets to me. I mean, what I have to do at the point I'm in, you know, here I am, the freshmen come in. If they understand evolution, if they understand math and science, good, I will keep them in my program. they will graduate, they will go on and become doctors and so forth. If they come in not having the background because their creationist teacher refused to teach them evolution, I will flunk them in the first semester. And they won't go on to those careers. So this is kind of an important thing. Of course, there are creationists who are smart enough to fake it, but still, this is a real problem. How bad does this problem get? Well, there was a survey of the American public done a while back to test them on their science literacy. And look at this. 14% think sound travels faster than light. 20% disagree that the center of the earth is very hot. A third disagree that the earth goes around the sun once a year. What does a year mean? Come on. 41% disagree that astrology, well, flip it around. I think that astrology is scientific. 45% think antibiotics kill viruses as well as bacteria. No, they don't. And I love that last one. 49% think ordinary tomatoes do not have genes, but genetically modified ones do. That's what we evil scientists are doing. We're going around squirting genes into your tomatoes. Right? So, this is kind of a crisis. We're in bad shape. Scientifically, we're not doing so good. Well, why is this happening? Well, I want to show you some data here. This is data culled from tax records from various organizations. Over there, and it's cut off the all-important y-axis that has numbers. The top number up there is 25 million in revenue. The far left bar is Answers in Genesis. I told you that's the big one. That's the one with the Creation Museum. That's the one run by Ken Ham. Institute for Creation Research is a creation group based in California. This is where Glenn Gish comes out of, if you've ever heard of him. And look there, they're making about $8 million a year. Then there's Discovery Institute, which is making about $6 million a year, but that's kind of misleading. The Discovery Institute, that's the Intelligent Design Group. That they have an institute that actually has multiple functions. A big part of their work is on analyzing traffic patterns in the Pacific Northwest. What that has to do with creationism, I don't know. It's just something they do to make money. So part of that $6 million is not dedicated to creationism. Reasons to Believe is an older creationist organization. And you can see there they're bringing in about $3 million a year. They believe that the earth is old. They're one of those old school creationists who think that they will try to reconcile geology with science. However, they still do not accept modern biology. I read their stuff and I cringe at the bad biology they promote. Creation Science and Evangelism, CSE, is Kent Hovind's old group, which has come on hard times, since the founder's in jail and all this kind of thing. So they're not making much, but Eric Hovind is doing his best to bring them back up. So we're talking millions of dollars here being flooded into the market by creationists promoting creationism. Now I've saved the best for last. The one over there on the right, National Center for Science Education. It's the only thing like it we have on our side. The NCSE is an organization based in California that specifically combats creationism. They send educational materials to school. They give advice to people. If you've got a kid in school who's getting taught creationism, one thing you can do is call up NCSE and they'll help you out, figure out what you can do, make recommendations on who to contact. They're a really good group. They also send out educational materials to schools. They're doing their best to help teach people learn about evolution. It's the only thing we've got like it. And here's their revenues. This isn't very fair, is it? It's really kind of pathetic how poorly we are supporting science educators in this country. And it's not just the creationists are opposing us, it's that the good people on our side aren't doing a good job of supporting the people who are trying to do their job. So I always give a little plug. If you go search for NCSE on the web, Google them, go to their site, and join it. Become a member of the NCSE. It's only $30 a year. And just think, if a room like this joined, you could add 20% to their annual budget. They're that small. They need that kind of help. So NCSE, do support it. It's a good group. Well, let's talk a little bit now about specifically what these guys are talking about. I want to focus on AIG because they are the biggest. They are the one that's doing the whole story here. Answers in Genesis does a lot of things right. If you go to their website, it's answersingenesis, all one word, .org, and browse around, you will be astounded. They have pumped so much money into this, and a lot of it has to do with providing educational resources. So you can go to this website, if you're a teacher, and download complete PowerPoint presentations explaining the whole of the creationist point of view. You can find PowerPoints explaining how Noah's Ark worked, right? All this stuff is available. If you're, teachers love this when people provide them the tools they need to do their job. And Answers in Genesis does. It's just that their tools are all lies. So let's take a look at some of the stuff they provide. So here I want to show you the entirety of the creationist theory of origins. There it is in one PowerPoint slide. Isn't that useful? And it's kind of cute and colorful and pretty. Go over well in a Sunday school class, right? Go over well in a first grade class. This is what they're aiming at, is they're aiming at your kids. So anyway, there's the 6 days of creation. There's the list of what they do. That's all you need to know, is you just got to read that first page of the first book of the Bible, and you got Answers in Genesis down cold. It's really, really easy. And we scientists, what do? We throw these gigantic thick books and we tell you to read the whole thing. Now, you just need to read the first page to get these guys. So that's their creation theory. They also helpfully provide resources for us evolutionary biology teachers. I've actually used this one in my classes. It is a complete summary of the entirety of evolutionary theory. That's it. You start with a one-cell creature, and then you go through, there's fish, and look, they bite, and they kill, they attack, and every single stage, all it is things fighting each other. That's the whole of evolutionary theory. And there, up there near the top, there's Alex Trebek beating Fred Flintstone to death. And the pinnacle of the evolutionary story is up there at the top, the origin of Batman. This is it. This is the entirety of the evolutionary theory that they will present to you. And it's terrible. This has no relationship at all to what I teach in any of my evolutionary biology courses. So I showed this in my Evo classes just as a laugh. Then we move on to the real stuff, which spends the rest of the semester. 2 minutes at the beginning, everything else, the real science. Now again, if you visit the Creation Museum, they have a clear message, and it's kind of a dishonest one. It's this. This is what they do throughout the museum, is they say, oh, we're using the same evidence. We're looking at the same facts as the scientists. But the thing is that we look at it through the lens of the Bible, and scientists look at it through the lens of their heathenish, mannish theories over there, like Darwin's theories, and they're both affecting our interpretation. And of course, if you're a Christian, the Bible can't be wrong, so the biblical interpretation must be right. And then they spin a load of hogwash about this very literal interpretation of the Bible that they then spread around. So this is what you find in the Creation Museum everywhere, is this tug of war between they're saying, oh, we really are science because we're looking at the same evidence, but we're just science that uses the Bible. And this is pretty explicit. The Bible, they're thinking in every area. He looks so happy sitting on his big sign, right? Anyway, this is what they're trying to get across, is Bible, 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 Bible. But we're really science, 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 science. I want to show you a few of the exhibits from the museum that highlight this conflict. That over here, what you see is something really typical that you find there, is they will have an exhibit where they contrast two things. One is God's Word. So there's the religious explanation for the history of life on Earth, is that God created each of those kinds. He created triceratops, he created butterflies, and then there's a limited amount of diversification. They can speciate a little bit. There was a global flood that wiped them out, and only one of each kind then was brought aboard. And then they branched out to the modern time. That's their story. That's God's Word. They contrast God's Word in a way that should be offensive to any Christians who happen to be here. God's Word versus human reason. Human reason is the enemy in the Creation Museum. Isn't that peculiar? You know, most of the Christians I talk to are fairly liberal Christians, and they like reason. They think that's a good thing. You should be logical, you should think things through, you should have evidence for actions that you take. But the Creation Museum throws that all out and tells you, no, not only are you liberal Christians the enemy because you compromise on the Bible, but you are supporting our enemy, reason. Here's a similar exhibit. I just want to show you this part because I thought it was, this is hilarious to an evolutionary biologist. I'm sorry. You know, they've got this story. God created one kind, it diversified, there was a flood, only one of each kind was then carried on the ark, and then those spread out again. In this picture, what you see illustrated is some kind of ape-like creature was created by God, gave rise to all the other ape-like creatures, including all of those hominid fossils you've heard about. Lucy, Neanderthal man, all those things. Those aren't related to us at all. They're glorified chimpanzees, all of them, over there on that branch. Humans were created, and notice that we're different from all the other creatures because we don't diversify at all. We're all just continuous, one unchanging population of godlike beings up to the present day. I've also presented this stuff, you know, I've talked about the Creation Museum at science meetings, but seriously, scientists are baffled by this stuff. They don't want to bother going to the Creation Museum, but they're really curious. What the hell are they talking about over there? And here's something I've shown. This is from the Creation Museum, and what it shows is the evolution of the horse. You've probably heard this story from scientists, right? Horses started out as little small animals about the size of a dog, and then over millions of years they got bigger and bigger until you got the modern forms. So you started with early browsers that lived on bushes and were very small, and then you got the modern day grazers that live on grasslands. It's a pretty clear story from the fossil record, although much more complicated than illustrated here. The creationists accept that. They say that's fine. They're all one kind. They're all horses. And that this evolution actually occurred. However, this evolution occurred over 4,000 years. Again, the evolutionists eat this up. Really? This is hyper-evolution. This is evolution at a pace we can't even imagine. This is really racing along. We can't imagine doing this kind of selection to get this kind of change over this kind of period. 4,000 years to produce that kind of diversity, that's insane. And I've talked to creationists about this, and here's the interesting take they have on this. You tell them this and say, you know, this is amazing. The scientists all tell you this is impossible. You can't possibly evolve this fast because, you know, there's a limited amount of change you can impose on. There's genetic load. Notice, we got mathematical arguments say this is impossible. They say, aha, that's proof of God because it took a miracle for this to happen. So they've turned evolution into a miraculous event led entirely by God, which is kind of wicked, I think. Okay, now you'll also find on the web all kinds of interesting stuff. This is a very comic bookish sort of page I thought was amusing. This is something called Mighty Mag. And what it is a cartoon about all the things Darwin got wrong. And what they argue is this bizarre genetics. So they're saying that there's no new information that can be added. All we do in genetics is rearrange the information that's already present. So they use this analogy here of blocks of different colors. Each color is a different gene. And you can reorganize these. You can put them in the chromosome in different ways. But it doesn't represent a real change in the information. Also, cutely, what I found amusing is that if you've got 4 blocks of 4 different colors, it says you can arrange them in 12 different ways. They can't even get the math right. That's wrong. You can do it, you know, there's different conditions, but you know, you can get 16 or many more from this kind of arrangement. And then they claim that Darwin did not know about DNA or genes, and that's true. He didn't know that each species has a set number of genes. I don't know that either. This is new information. It's certainly not what the evidence shows. We have a variety of different, you know, even within this room, there will be a small amount of variation in the actual number of genes each of us has because there's variance in copy numbers. Because there's a set limit to the amount of information each species has to work with. You know, this is a collection of lies. Every single word of this story, other than that Darwin didn't know about DNA, is completely false. But that's what they're pushing. They also have this idea, again, it's kind of cute and cartoony, but they claim that there's only corruption, you can only see loss. That, for instance, fish have lost their sight and lizards have lost their legs. Where did lizards get their legs to begin with? We know that lizards evolved from fish. Fish don't have legs, lizards do. Clearly there had to be something where there was a gain of information. This is all total nonsense again. None of this is true, but this is what they're spreading. Now you might be asking yourself, why do they do this? You know, the science is very clear and straightforward about how this all works, what the evidence is. We've got it really well documented. You can go in this library and you will find so many books that lay down all the evidence for evolutionary theory. And there's a really simple explanation for why they promote lies over truth. And that is because these are deeply religious people who have absorbed this mistaken notion that morality and religion are one and the same. That if you refute any aspect of their religion, that will lead you down the path to become cannibals, rapists, and murderers. Hopefully not in that order. But it will completely derange your moral foundation, and that's why we have to fight these. That's why it's justified to lie at every step about this stuff, because we're not in a fight for scientific truth. We're in a fight for the morality of our children. So this is another thing from Answers in Genesis. Again, you can just download these wonderful PowerPoints all over the place. And this is their worldview. This is how they see the world. They're in that nice shining castle over there where 6 days equals God as authority. That's the foundation. And you got this Christian castle built on there. And over there in the purplish castle, the evil castle, millions of years. I told you, millions of years. That's the code word for absolute evil. Millions of years equals man as authority. And there we are. There's all those scientists up there with their cannons blasting away at the foundations of the Christian castle while flying festive balloons labeled pornography and racism and homosexuality. I don't know. This is just not my thing. But okay. That's what they think. And of course, the solution they propose is that Christians need to get better aim and start aiming their cannons at the millions of years argument. Again, this is the whole basis of their argument against those liberal Christians, is they've got to fight the foundation, blow that up before we can progress. Okay, so that's where these creationists are coming from. Now I want to say a few things about intelligent design. Intelligent design creationism, I'll try to be quick here because we're coming up on our hour. Intelligent design, just look at the bolded part right now. This is from Stephen Meyer, who is one of the bigwigs at the Discovery Institute, and one of the founders of the intelligent design creationism movement. And what they claim is that intelligent design is an evidence-based scientific theory about life's origins. It's really weird because on the one hand, they refute science, they reject science, they're in denial about science, but on the other, they really love science. Science is cool and powerful. They want to be scientists when they grow up. So they're saying this. Meyer recently wrote this book, Signature in the Cell. It's gigantic. It's huge. It's something like 500 pages. And most of it is Stephen Meyer patting himself on the back and telling him how wonderful and clever he is to see all this stuff. But I can digest it down for you so you don't have to read it. Here's the entire summary of this entire 500-page book. He says biology is really complex. He gives many examples of this, which I agree with. Biology really is complex. My students also agree every time they get their test scores back. Yes, it's really hard. But then he says, okay, complexity can only be created by design. Whoa, this is William Paley's argument again, 1802. Are we done with this yet? 210 years, right? We've had enough of this. But that's his assertion. He makes it boldly, and he says, therefore, biology was created by design. That's the entirety of the intelligent design argument. Really, you've got the whole summary right there. That's all they say over and over again. So, for instance, I've got some quotes here from him. This is scattered throughout his book. He says, okay, information invariably reflects the prior activity of conscious and intelligent persons. Any information theorist will tell you that that's false. Says information invariably originates from an intelligent source. Information invariably, creative intelligence, intelligent design played a role in the origin of information. He really loves the word invariably. It's all over the place. But it's still not true. And they talk a lot about information. Specified complexity is another magic phrase that they throw out a lot. If you see specified complexity, that means something was designed. Now here's the weird thing. It's a 500-page book. I read through once, couldn't find a single definition for specified complexity. I actually suffered for you and read it a second time, looking specifically for definitions of specified complexity, because it's kind of central to their whole argument. They say, and whenever you see this, you know it's designed. There's proof of design. So I want to know how I see it. I mean, is this table specified complexity? Are these shoes? Is my ear? What? While looking through the definition, here it is. The term specified complexity is therefore a synonym for specified information. Can you say tautology? That's not a definition. That doesn't help me at all. In Meyer's book, however, there are no better definitions. That's it. That's the ultimate definition of specified complexity in the entire book. The entire thing his book rests on is not defined anywhere in the text. They don't tell us how to measure it. They don't even tell us what the units it's measured in are. We have no way to use this information. So I asked a friend of mine, Jeff Shallett, who is actually an information theorist. He's a mathematician and computer scientist at the University of Waterloo. And this is his statement. Intelligent design creationists love to call it specified information or specified complexity and imply that it is widely accepted by the scientific community, but this is not the case. There is no paper in the scientific literature that gives a rigorous and coherent definition of creationist information, nor is it used in any scientific or mathematical investigations. So they're building this entire story on a bit of fluff that they've invented and can't even define. It's really sad. Now, as it says, it's not in the published scientific literature. Conveniently, about this time, this was in February of 2012, the Discovery Institute published a list of all the peer-reviewed creationist papers on intelligent design in the scientific literature. Really, they did. They gave the full list. There it is, the whole thing, the complete list of all the scientific papers on intelligent design published ever, compiled not by me, but by the Discovery Institute. So this is kind of an authoritative list. There's 72 of them. Now, when you look at the list really carefully, you might discover some peculiarities. For instance, some of these don't really look like science. Like, for instance, there's William Lane Craig down there. You know, the debater. This isn't a theology journal, so you can tell right away they're kind of waffling. A number of the papers are in very obscure, very bizarre journals. Some of these journals, when I looked them up, were obviously fake journals. They were just created on the web as places for creationists to post things. They don't really count. There are a couple that are legitimate. There's a couple of nature and science papers in here. But when you look at those nature and science papers, what you discover is that they are not about intelligent design. They are by people associated with the Discovery Institute who published a legitimate scientific paper on some other topic. But they don't really mention creationism anywhere in these papers. So they're kind of faking it. The other thing is, 72 papers. This is the complete list from 1984 to 2012. That's not very impressive. That's, what is that? That's 28 years worth of papers. They got 72 papers total. So I said, okay, well, let's go see what we get for that sort of puts it in context, that what the Intelligent Design Group has put out is kind of pathetic It's not very impressive at all. And then I noticed another thing. This is that, back to the Discovery Institute's list. I don't know if you can see it. There's some I put in purple. There's a lot of purple ones in there, isn't there? Something like 20% of the papers that are listed in this final list are from one guy named David Abel. Has anybody heard of David Abel before? You know, I keep up with the creationists. I follow their literature. I pay attention to them. I had never heard of David Abel before, and he's responsible for 20% of the scientific output of the creationist movement, which blew me away. So anyway, I went looking for his papers, and here's one. It's called Is Life Unique? And it's in a journal called Life. It turns out that Life is one of those fake journals. It's got the most amazingly insane paper. Any crackpot on the internet can send a paper to them, and they will publish it. So that's not very credible. But there's a paper, Is Life Unique, by David L. Abel. And then look at that byline. He works at the Department of Proto-Biocybernetics and Proto-Biosemiotics at the Origin of Life Science Foundation. That's the most impressive title I have ever heard. I don't even know what proto-biocybernetics and proto-biosemiotics are. And I'm supposed to be an evolutionary biologist. I felt some shame here. I have no idea what these things are. And then notice it actually gives an address for these things, which is kind of sad for them. Because, you know, if you have an address, there's this thing called Google Earth. Have you ever played with it? It's kind of fun. You can just get on Google Maps and go searching. And I thought I'd look and see this giant shining chrome tower, you know, for the Origin of Life Science Foundation. And I went poking around in there, and I found it. It turns out that it's in a suburb of Greenbelt, Maryland. It's in a little cul-de-sac. And here, do you want to see the Origin of Life Science Foundation? That's it. And you're saying, oh, there must be some mistake. You must have made a mistake when you were searching. You know, you're just a biologist. You can't possibly find things on Google Maps. This was actually taken by somebody who conveniently drove by to take a photograph. And I don't know, it was a higher resolution image. You can actually zoom in on a plaque above the car next to the garage door. Yes, it really is the Origin of Life Science Foundation. I think the Department of Proto-Cyberbiotics is that left window. I don't want to know what's happening in his bathroom. But this is what you find over and over and over again when you look at these so-called creation scientists. It's all a shell game. It's all a facade that they've thrown up. And it's ridiculous. There, you know, I found another example just recently. Some of you may have seen this a while back. Harun Yahya is this Muslim creationist. And a couple of years ago, he was sending out this Atlas of Creation to everyone, this gigantic book. Basically what the book shows is, here's a photo of a current creature, here's a photo of a fossil. They haven't changed, therefore evolution is false. He went on for hundreds of pages like this. But as you notice up there is the example. There's a modern caddisfly, and there you see circled up there in a piece of amber, there's a fossilized caddisfly, and they're exactly identical. He doesn't mention it's right down to the hook in the abdomen. This is a fishing fly. He took this picture from a fly fishing catalog and splatted it in his book as an example of a contemporary animal. Answers in Genesis just did this the other day. This just came out. It's really hilarious. In their journal, they published a paper that categorized all the animals that went on the ark. They figured out that there were only 135 mammals that you needed to carry on the ark, and the paper lists each different order of animal that was carried as one species of them. And one of the orders that they listed is the ring-tailed gray or gliding possum kind, and they had a photograph of it. Look real close at that photo. You notice anything funny about it? It's a stuffed toy posed in a tree. This is the basis of their data collection. Is this person went browsing through the web, found pictures of all these animals, looked at them and said, oh yeah, that's a kind, splat, put this in the paper. And obviously didn't look very carefully at this photo. Okay, so let me wrap this up. Let me give you the quick summary. This is the evolution of creation. Old school creationists strove to reconcile faith and science. I can have some respect for the creationists of 100 years ago. Even though they were wrong about the faith part, they were making a sincere effort to bring science to their religion. Modern creationists are denialists who reject science altogether. They have thrown it out. That if you want to talk about the history of creationism, it has been a spiraling into madness over the last century, getting crazier and crazier, worse and worse every year, until now we've got these organizations like Answers in Genesis that are pushing total nonsense. Yet despite rejecting science, creationists are enamored with the trappings of science. What they propose is cargo cult science. Let's pretend to do science. Let's put on lab coats. For instance, did anyone see Don Kennedy's? He did a documentary a couple of years ago before he died, in which he claimed that creationism was the truth. And I just about fell down laughing at his opening scene, which was a bunch of tables, and there's all these flasks and cylinders and beakers full of colored water and dry ice bubbling and steaming away. And there's Kennedy in his white lab coat strutting among them. You know, you can't find a worse example of pretend science than that. And finally, I would just add, you know, don't be fooled by intelligent design creationism. You look at people like David Abel, it's just simply charlatans working away behind the scenes, putting up a pretense of being real scientists, but it's totally fake, every bit of it. It's kind of shameful. But just to put it on a nice note at the end, let me just say, this is actually my favorite quote from Darwin in The Origin of Species. It's mostly cut off, I'm sorry. But it's where he's arguing for his case for natural selection. And what he's doing is he's saying, you know, this is science. I'm presenting the evidence. The best thing you could do to defeat prejudice against my theory is to go out and find evidence of your own, to argue diligently for a theory. And there's the important phrase down there, do good service by conscientiously expressing his conviction that what we have to do as people, as scientists, is do our part, which is to be conscientious and honest about everything. And that's how we arrive at the truth. And it's exactly the opposite of what the creationists are now doing. Thank you. I've gone a little over, but I think we have a little time for questions, right? 20 minutes or so? Does that work? Thank you. Yeah. Yes?
So why do 50% of the people, educated people in this country, believe this stuff?
Well, as I said earlier, I think one of the major reasons is that they have successfully tied religion to morality. You know, I see this all the time with young people. They grow up, they go have a family, they're raising kids, they're perfectly happy and secular, and the kids reach a certain age and they all say, you know, we should send the kids to Sunday school so that they learn to be good people. You know, even though they don't really believe themselves, they continue this pattern of indoctrination. And I think that's the secret, is that these people have got in their heads, you know, these are people who are not thinking seriously about science, which is okay. You know, everybody doesn't have to be a scientist. They're not thinking seriously about science. All they're thinking about is what's best for my kid, what makes my children good people. And it's religion, and hey, this pastor I went to see this last weekend said that evolution is bunk. And they accept it. It's a really clever con game that the churches have played on us. And I think one of the most effective tactics that the atheist movement can have is to divorce religion from morality. Actually, we don't have to do much because we just have to look at like the Catholic Church and we say, oh, yeah, morality, religion, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Yeah.
I think another answer to his question is science is hard.
Yes, science is so, well, you know, it's not that hard to, you know, at the level that the layman has to know it, it's not that hard. You know, you can turn on a National Geographic documentary, or Richard Attenborough, or whatever, or David Attenborough, excuse me, and you can see science clearly presented in a way that anyone can understand. you know, you're not going to be doing science experiments with that information, but you can have an appreciation of the way the world works.
So my question is, I often hear from people that if this is all false, right, and it's not real, why do we care? Just let it go about its business and go away. I mean, it's false. Why do we care?
Is it going away? You know, I care when people teach children lies. I care when they undermine the foundation of a scientific and technological powerhouse like the United States by corrupting the basic educational system of this country. You know, I'm serious. I mentioned this as a college professor. I see this incoming class, and I see an awful lot of students who are terribly unprepared, who don't have the basic math skills even, who lack any knowledge at all of biology. And we have to start from scratch with our freshmen. It sure would be nice if we actually had high school students coming in who were prepared, who had at least trigonometry under the belt, understood the general basics of evolutionary theory, you know, were prepared to see a context for the biology we talk about. But in every case, we have to go back to square one and start from scratch with all of our classes. And it's getting tiring, because there's really cool advanced stuff I could be talking about in the classroom. And instead, I'm giving them the basics. Back there.
Where did the belief come from that dinosaurs and humans existed at the same time?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, like I said, there's been this evolution, and creationists 100 years ago would have thought that was nonsense. Dinosaurs were in that gap. You know, they didn't have to overlap. They aren't mentioned in the Bible, really. This comes from Answers in Genesis, actually, and the Genesis flood, because they take the Bible very literally. And there's a verse in the Bible when Noah's Ark comes along, and God commands Noah to take all creatures with breath in their nostrils onto the boat. All is the magic word. No exceptions, right? So if you had a dinosaur that breathed, it had to have been on the ark. Yes, every one of them. That's one of the conclusions that their logic leads them to. There's another question up here.
Well, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to
Oh.
respond to why it's important, like why we should care. Because from a younger standpoint, it's frightening to me to think about the voting power that those people have in putting people in office, and then the direction that our country goes and the laws that we put into place as a result.
Like the
Yes.
science committee in Congress right now?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. What's his name? There's one guy on the committee who's. Oh, he's new. Yeah, there's one guy in the committee who announced that global warming could not be real because the Bible said that God would not change the earth on us anymore. And so he said, you know, basically he's in charge of this stuff, and he's saying, no, we don't have to worry about it. Yeah, and Marco Rubio just came out with this silly statement where he said, basically, he doesn't know about this stuff, but he thinks it's a theological question.
Oh,
Yeah. And science can't answer whether the earth is 7,000 years old or 7 ages old. You know, just crazy talk like this coming from these guys. It's just bizarre stuff. Yeah.
With AIG and other places making so many millions of dollars, is there any like public political domain that has gone on that?
Oh, yeah, actually there's some interesting developments there. Answers in Genesis built this $27 million museum, right? So they had buckets of money. What's been happening, though, is the most recent audits show that although they're still slightly profitable in their museum, museum attendance has been dropping steadily every year. It's been on the decline. If the trend continues next year, the museum will be running in the red. And that's when catastrophes start happening, because the rest of Answers in Genesis is also running in the red. They actually lost money this year, while the museum is still making a profit. If the museum stops making a profit, Answers in Genesis is looking at something really difficult.
Government subsidies.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, maybe not a federal government, but a state government. The Kentucky government has been pretty sympathetic to their efforts to build an expansion to the Creation Museum called the Ark Park. They want to build a life-size model of Noah's Ark on a giant playground sort of area. It's hilarious. They want to build it life-size. They're not going to use techniques from 4,000 years ago, of course. They've got all kinds of plans for rides. Like, would you believe there's a 7 Plagues of Egypt ride?
Is the ark going to be built by, that park, is it going to be built by one man?
No, it's not.
Okay.
They want to bring in a whole construction crew.
Oh, okay.
And they actually got state subsidies for that. So they got subsidy on the sales tax. The state is also building an expansion of the highway system there to ease access. So the state is investing quite a bit of money in this. Unfortunately, the fundraising for the Ark has plateaued. They needed $25 million just to start. They need 100 and some million to finish it. It's a big project. And they aren't even getting the money they need to start. And it's been sitting there for like 4 or 5 years, flatline. I think Answers in Genesis has just about exhausted the community of suckers in the United States, which is good word, good news. And I expect they're going to be having some interesting problems in the future. Other problems that will come up in 2015, I mentioned that Kent Hovind gets out of jail. Kent Hovind is also a very charismatic and influential character. His son is also very active in creationism and has been taking their organization in new directions. I think there's going to be an interesting battle over that creationist organization once Hovind gets out. Creationists are not shy about suing the shit out of each other. Answers in Genesis in the United States actually was founded by splitting Answers in Genesis in Australia. And there was all kinds of underhanded skullduggery going on there, lawsuits flying all over the place. These are unsavory, profit-mongering people. So I'm really hoping for fireworks in the next couple of years. Look for them. Just legal fireworks all over the place. It's going to be fun. Other questions? Yes?
I'm actually a high school science teacher, and
Oh, good work.
when you encounter some of these students, which in the community I teach, and I do get some younger creationists, and I don't know, I've struggled with what's the best way to, kind of combat this. I mean, you could bludgeon them over the heads and say, those ideas are wrong, your parents are idiots, and your witch doctor is even dumber, and lying to you. Or, I guess this, with the holidays coming up with family members, dealing with them when they bring stuff like this up. What's the...
I know exactly. It's not just the high school level. I get these in the college level too. And you're right. You can't beat them to death in the classroom to make an example of them. It just doesn't. The administration gets really upset when you do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And my approach has always been to do a fact-based addressing of their points. Have you read Big Daddy by Jack Chick?
I'm familiar with Jack.
Oh, go to chick.com and download Big Daddy. It's one of his, he does these little comics.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Big Daddy, it's a model for how these people think. It's about a young man coming into the college classroom and boldly standing up against the professor, who quickly flees in panic and gives up on science and accepts the Lord Jesus as his Savior, all this kind of stuff. It's really silly stuff. And the student gives this series of arguments that any idiot who knows any science could refute. But the chick version of the college professor can't. Anyway, we get these a lot. And I've just found that the best thing to do is you just address their arguments. And you can shoot them down so easily because all of their arguments are stupid.
Yeah.
Really stupid. Another thing I recommend that can help a lot and keep it in the classroom is there's a book called the Counter-Creationism Handbook. Have you seen this? It's by a guy named Mark Isaac, I-S-A-A-K. You can get it on Amazon for like $13.
It's a thin paper.
Yeah, it's a little thin paperback.
Yep.
And what it is it's got an indexed and sorted list of creationist objections with a 1 or 2 paragraph refutation of them with citations of scientific literature. It is marvelously effective because you quickly discover Well, actually, your creationist opponents quickly discovered that every single argument they've got is recycled crap, because it's all in the book. I have not yet run across a really original, novel argument. And so, I've gotten into debates with creationists where you do this showy thing where they give you an argument, you pull out the book and you thumb through it, you find the answer, and you read it aloud to them. You do that 2 or 3 times, and then they grab the book out of your hand and start reading it themselves. It's great. It's so effective. And you just know that if you've got an honest creationist who's actually thinking about the issues, they're going to go home and order it. And they're going to read it. And they're going to struggle to answer those rebuttals, and they're going to fail. And this is where we really win in these arguments, is we do not expect epiphanies. You do not get epiphanies about science. What will happen is if you engage a creationist and you argue with them nicely, they'll think about it and they'll get mad at you maybe, and they'll go home and they'll study it to shoot you down, and then they're thinking. You've suddenly shaken them out of their habit of just accepting what the authorities said. And they start thinking, they start looking and researching, and then they discover for themselves some truths that make them think even more. That's all we really want from these people, is we want you to start thinking. That's what high school teachers want too, isn't it? Yeah.
What was that little book you're talking about?
Oh, it's by Mark Isaac, Isaak, and it's called the Counter-Creationism Handbook.
Folks, we've just got the hall till 8:30, so we need to wrap this up. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been fun.
Speaking.
Thank you.